Good morning, everyone. I hope that you all have enjoyed a long holiday weekend and that you're excited about the week ahead. My name is Robin Abear, and I'm with the K-12 Policies and Programs Unit here at the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. I'm joined today by my CPE colleague, Trinity Walsh, who will be sharing a data moment at the end of our session today, just like we've always done. I am thrilled to welcome you to year 2 of our webinar series focused on early post-secondary opportunities in Kentucky. Trinity and I and all of our colleagues at the CPE and many around the state are committed to opening doors so that all of Kentucky's students can reap the benefits of participating in early post-secondary opportunities. I know that many of you also share that commitment, so that's why we're here, right? Today's kickoff webinar for the new year is focused on creating a more inclusive early post-secondary opportunity ecosystem for our students with disabilities. A quick review of data will tell you that we have a lot of work to do in Kentucky in this area. Today, we are just thrilled to have 3 very wise and experienced experts to speak into this topic. And they include Mr. Johnny Collette, who is the Deputy Director of the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. David Wickersham is also with us today. He's a consultant with the Office of Special Education and Early Learning at the Kentucky Department of Education. And we're also joined by Julie Caudill-Clark, who is the Director of Accessibility Services at Hazard Community and Technical College. So we're really grateful for having these folks in the room with us today to talk about some of the issues related to students with disabilities and early post-secondary opportunities, especially dual credit. So at this time, I would like to invite Johnny Collette into the room with us. And we're going to kick this off with a kind of a national perspective and a visionary perspective. So, Johnny, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I am thrilled to have you here today. I know that you've worked in special education for many years at the state and local and even federal levels. So I'd love to hear at the beginning of our conversation your vision for students with disabilities as it relates to post-secondary education and transition into the workforce. Tell us a little bit about why you do what you do.
Yeah, well, thanks, Robin. Appreciate the invitation. And thanks for including me and with this fantastic group, an important topic. Appreciate always the work of the Council on Post-Secondary Education in Kentucky. When I was thinking about your question, reflecting a bit, we need to be committed, in my view, to advancing efforts that increase post-secondary options access, and those are two different things that increase post-secondary options access and the opportunity to be successful for all students, including students with disabilities. When you look last year, 20% of students with disabilities, that's across all disability categories, 20% are enrolled in a college or a university in the year after they exit high school. If you look at just students with intellectual disabilities, that number is less than 10%. Now let's think about employment for a minute. Only 40% of students with disabilities, again, across all disability categories, are competitively employed in the year following their exit from high school. And if you look at students with significant disabilities, it's less than 20%. Now let's kind of just blow that up and think about our state in general. We've got a workforce participation rate challenge and opportunity in our state. I think we all understand that. When we think about people with disabilities, not just students now, let's think about all people with disabilities across the Commonwealth. We have a 42% gap in employment rate between people with and without disabilities. That ranks Kentucky 48th in the nation and behind all 7 of our neighboring states. So, the vision is to advance efforts that ensure that students with disabilities have the necessary post-secondary opportunities, early and otherwise, to better prepare them for competitive integrated employment.
Oh, wow, Johnny, thank you for that introduction, really kind of emphasizing the need and the importance of this work. So I want to just dig in a little bit about if this is such an important issue for Kentucky, what opportunities do you see right now at this moment in time for us to create this more inclusive post-secondary landscape for students with disabilities?
Well, first of all, I think we need to make sure that we're actually talking about it, right? That we are actually talking about it. So when we're having conversations and developing plans in higher education, or really even in K-12 or anywhere else, for example, around, let's say, diversity, equity, and inclusion, A fair question is, are students with disabilities included from the beginning? And do goals, activities, and the metrics we're tracking in those conversations and plans demonstrate that students with disabilities are a part of our, for example, diversity, equity, and inclusion plan? So, from a higher ed perspective, I think we need to come face to face with the data that we sort of just talked about, showing that 80% of students with disabilities who exited Kentucky high schools last year are not enrolled in any of our institutions of higher education. And, when you ask the question, well, why is that? Well, of course, there are many, many reasons why that is. But I think any improvement begins with the recognition that, our systems are designed to produce the results that they're getting. And if we want different results, all of our systems have to consider how do we improve? How do we innovate? How do we even change if that's what's called for? And in some cases, maybe significantly. You've heard me talk about this, and I know it's sort of a crazy image, but I grew up in the mountains of Southeast Kentucky, so around some rivers, and many of you have grown up around rivers. Lots of opportunities for that in Kentucky, right? But if I jump in a river and do nothing, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to drift downstream. Now, best case scenario is we just have a drifting good time, right? We just drift downstream and pass the time away. Maybe a lot of bad things can happen too, but sort of under the best case scenario, that's probably what happens. Now, that's if I jump in the river and do nothing. It's not if I jump in the river and do something wrong. It's not if I jump in the river and do something bad. It's what happens by default. If I jump in the river and do nothing, I drift. Right. So if I want to go upstream, I got to go there on purpose, and I got to go there intentionally. So when I think about this and I think about our systems are designed to get the results they're getting. And if we want different results, we've got to do different things.
Johnny, I really appreciate that idea of just intentional focus on the issue. If we really, not to talk about it at 40,000 feet, but to really talk about it in meaningful ways. I really love, I don't get tired of the river analogy. So just keep using that one. I think it's a great one, and really gives a lot of context to this question that we're talking about. So I'm hearing you say be intentional about like strategic plans, or the planning that any organization at the local school level, the district level, the state level, that we need to be really intentional and put a focus on the success of students with disabilities. As you were talking, I was thinking about CPE's 60 by 30 goal. So there's a huge gap in the data that you just shared and that goal that we have. I'd like to round up our conversation, Johnny, by just asking you, what key advice or information would you want policymakers or educators in Kentucky to have as they strategize? Let's say, okay, they've heard you say we need to include this in our plans. What would you say that would help us have a more bright educational financial future for students with disabilities?
Yeah, well, I back out of it just a little bit and think about, we do have, if you think about any indicator of almost anything, we've got a significant gap between people with and without disabilities. So, we know we also have a participation rate gap, because we've learned from y'all and our K-12 friends in KDE that for early post-secondary opportunities, well, if there's a participation rate gap, between students with and without disabilities in dual credit, for example, well, the question is, well, why is that? What fuels that? Well, part of what fuels that might be in what we would call an opportunity gap. Fair enough. Here's my next question, though. If an opportunity gap feeds the participation rate gap, what feeds the opportunity gap? And let's all get honest with each other and challenge each other. Could it be that it's an expectations gap? Do we expect that students with disabilities will enroll in and be successful in with support in dual credit and other early post-secondary opportunities? Our executive director at the Human Development Institute, Dr. Kathy Shepard-Jones, has an incredible quote. She didn't mean it to be quotable, but it is. And she says, disability is not an outcome, it is a demographic. The extent to which that's true, and I believe it is, then I would challenge us all to consider, how can we be more intentional in including students with disabilities as we would any other underrepresented demographic? in dual credit opportunities. And the last thing I would say is, we've just got to care for policy advisors and others and people who are making decisions that impact a lot of people. We've got to care more about preparing students than we do preserving systems. We can and should do and care about both of those things. We just need to care about the one more than we do the other. And, again, our systems are getting the results they're getting because they're designed to get them. So if we want different results, if we don't like those results anymore, we got to do some things differently. And even if that means significantly. And so, I think we know that tweaking and tinkering around the edges probably doesn't get us there.
Johnny, I see some love coming through the webinar on your comments. I love to hear you talk about the participation gap and the opportunity gap, and really challenging us to ask some hard questions about how our systems are designed and what we need to shift or do to make things better for students with disabilities. All right, Johnny, we're going to close our conversation. I'm going to invite you back a little bit later on, but thank you for kicking us off with a great vision for what we're talking about today. I'd like to now invite David Wickersham into the conversation. Good morning, David. I'm glad you're here.
Hey, good morning.
Appreciate you joining us. David is standing in for Greta Hilton, who was not able to join us this morning. And David represents the more of a state perspective. He's there at the Kentucky Department of Education. And I'd like to hear a little bit, David, about from the department's perspective, what is our vision in Kentucky or our strategy for making dual credit and all our early post-secondary opportunities more available to students with disabilities?
Okay. I'm happy to answer. I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate today and on Greta's behalf. One of the things, kind of following a thread that Johnny had kind of begun, is paying some attention to what's going on at the federal level. So much of the work of the department in the area of special education is governed or informed by the Office of Special Education Programs, and then the parameters established for us by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Just this calendar year, OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs, has introduced a new initiative that actually touches on some of the content that Johnny had addressed. The specific initiative that we're paying close attention to right now is Expect, Engage, and Empower Successful Transitions for All. The department, the Federal Department of Education, and OSEP is seeing this as a way that individual education programs ought to be informed by a long-term view of post-secondary life, including education, including employment, essentially the sorts of opportunities that Johnny had addressed a little bit. But I like the fact that it starts with that expect. And I think our belief is that the expectation is not just the expectations that an individual student would have or their family may have, that the entire system has for them, that our society, that our culture has for that group of students. Johnny had touched on this a bit, and I think it's a really critical factor around students with disabilities. Intellectual disabilities typically aren't even in the top 5 of the most common disabilities that are identified for students with disabilities. So if you begin with the assumption, and it may be baked in, hopefully it's not, but if people approach it, if society approaches it with the notion that, well, if someone has a disability, that may suggest an intellectual impairment that would stop them from advancing into a career, into college, rarely the case. Students with functional mental disabilities are a fraction even of the population of students with disabilities. So we really can reasonably raise our expectations and raise the bar for performance there.
Oh, wow. That really tees up the next question that I wanted to ask, David. Thank you so much for, I love your expect the high expectations and engaging and empowering students. Johnny talked about being really intentional in our planning and our, strategic planning for all students. And I'm wondering, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges or opportunities that local schools or districts have, and how the state can provide support or help as they implement those plans?
Sure. One of the things that Johnny had touched on was what is essentially our post-school outcome information. You're looking at numbers 20% of students who go on to higher education. There are other measures of successful transition into adult living that don't include a post-secondary opportunity, but that's a pretty telling and striking kind of figure. One of the things that we have been working on recently under Greta's guidance and direction is a profile of transition practices that we've created and made available to LEAs, to local districts. And essentially, that's got 5 core components on it that we ask transition teams to focus on. Transition teams being commonly the IEP team, but other interested folks. We're asking them to focus on student-focused planning, which of course is a built-in part of the IEP process, program structures, which gives them some opportunity to review and reflect upon the structures that they have in place at the local level and in their community. Student development, you may measure that through academic progress or otherwise. Family engagement, making sure that families maintain and establish and feel supported and high expectations for their students. And then interagency collaboration between the different folks who may be involved in moving a student from a secondary into some post-secondary environment, whatever that may look like for that particular child. So I think that's one of the things that we're kind of using to try to inform and address that challenge and maybe kind of chart a path into better supports.
Yeah. Okay. David, we'll make sure that everybody who's joined us today will have access to that resource. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And I want to zoom in one last question on that last component that you just mentioned, because here at CPE, that's really important to us, that partnership between the K-12 system and the higher ed system, especially as it relates to transitions through early post-secondary opportunities, whether it's dual credit or some other avenue. So I just wondered if you might talk just a little about how high schools and post-secondary institutions might work together better than they do right now for the benefit of students with disabilities in terms of recruitment and enrollment and support for especially dual credit.
So to kind of quickly just run through a few different initiatives that we have going at the state level right now. Our office has created, through a partnership with the Office of Career and Technical Education, we've established an exceptional child consultant who specifically works on professional development for CTE teachers, providing instructional tools, guidance, things of that sort to support students, schools and teachers kind of through that CTE process. In terms of incentives for participation in post-secondary opportunities, we've used American Rescue Plan or ARP funding to provide over $1 million in scholarships to Kentucky students with disabilities who have satisfied criteria for post-secondary readiness, whatever that may look like. So we've had a few hundred participants in that, so that's been a good opportunity for us. We have provided a little under $2 million in sub-grants to each of our special education regional technical assistance centers. There are 9 of those around the state. They've each received $220,000 to establish specific goals and activities that resonate in their communities with their local providers, local needs, identifying local resources that they can use to provide supports tailored to their area of the state and whatever their unique situation may be. We also have about 36 districts working with us on a post-school predictor implementation project that we've got aligned with some National Technical Assistance Center work to try to move into hopefully bolstering dual credit opportunities and post-secondary enrollment. And then kind of outside that specific area, we have been working a lot on improving workforce participation. We had a workforce participation challenge, a design challenge that we had funded that's created some practice work cells for students with more significant intellectual disabilities to successfully transition into what you might think of as industrial sorts of settings and employment, and then have also partnered with the Special Olympics to expand unified STEM robotics, which would have both applications in industrial setting and also in post-secondary.
Wow. Sounds like you all really made a lot of investments, human capital as well as financial resources. And I just keep hearing this theme from Johnny and also from you about intentional planning and support for from the state and for local schools and districts. All right, David, our time is up. Thank you so much. I'm going to
Thank you.
invite you back in just a few minutes for the whole panel. And I'm going to move the conversation now to Julie Cottle Clark, who works in disability services at the Hazard Community and Technical College. And so, Julie, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. I'd like to start with a question about I've asked everybody about what is your vision. So I'd like to ask you the same question. There at Hazard Community and Technical College, what is the vision for inclusivity when it comes to students with disabilities and participation in dual credit?
We're a smaller KCTCS school in southeastern Kentucky, and working here, what I have noticed from the administration, the faculty, and the staff is that everyone's welcome. We want everybody to have the same opportunities regardless of whether or not they have a disability. And so with dual credit, there's no difference. We service about 800 to 1,000 students a semester in dual credit. And I would say that probably about 10% of our students that have registered for dual credit have also registered for disability services through my office. We actively advocate for dual credit with all the area high schools. We go out, I personally go out to the high schools and advocate for those students to have those opportunities, as long as they meet those parameters for either the technical requirements for what they're interested in or the prereqs for the general education courses they're trying to take. And the students who don't meet those parameters, say for general education, we try to give them technical opportunities so that they can investigate career pathways while they're still in high school.
Right. So you go out and intentionally recruit students with disabilities, like through a personal visit to their schools. All right, that's awesome. So when a student with a disability enrolls in dual credit, what happens next? How do you support them and ensure that they receive appropriate and adequate support for this coursework?
Again, I work with the case managers. When I started this job several years ago, the lady who was doing the position, she had about 37 students college-wide dual credit and our general population of students with disabilities. Our number in the spring was 197. So it's grown tremendously. And I feel that that's important because I go out to the high schools, I attend IEP meetings, I talk to the students in groups, I work with the case managers. And when we have students with disabilities who are trying to do dual credit, what we do is we have the case managers work collaboratively with me to register the students for services and provide me the documentation. So from the time that they get here, moving forward from day one of class, they have the accommodations they need already in place.
Well, I was going to ask you the same question that I had asked earlier about how high schools and post-secondary institutions could work together better. You've already given me a great example of how you all do that. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that about how you would recommend that high schools and post-secondary work together for the benefit of students with disabilities?
I would recommend that. I know some of the bigger schools don't have the opportunity to go out to the high schools, but having that relationship, even if it's through email and meeting on Teams or Zoom with the case managers at the area high schools and telling them, this is the programs we offer, this is what we can offer to your students, and working with them collaboratively to get those students in and get them engaged, going out to all the different fairs that we have in the state and advertising dual credit, advertising those early opportunities for students will give those students the ability to see what options they have We'll get them in the door to early post-secondary opportunities, and we'll also connect them to a name and a face of who they need to contact to make sure their accommodations are met in the classroom.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. All right, we're running short on time, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the room for everybody to come back for just a couple of questions for the whole group. So I got 2 questions, and you all can just feel free to answer if you have something that you really want to share. The first question I'd like to ask is, I know that everybody who's on the call today is curious about, with your expertise and your experience, if you had to say 1 or 2 resources that everybody who's involved with this work should access or should, make sure that they have or that they go to, what would it be?
I would tell you that students, especially students with intellectual disabilities, the options for them to go to like the Perkins Center right now, there's a waiting list. So what I advocate for with the high schools is to get those students into the technical classes, because if they get 12 credit hours in college credit in technical classes through dual credit, they then qualify for ability to benefit. So then they can come to our KCTCS schools and pursue some sort of credential when they finish high school. That's one. The second thing I would advocate for, and I refer every student to, is voc rehab, because voc rehab will help them with post-secondary education, with books, with technology, and will help them find a job when they're done.
All right. Thanks, Julie.
This is Johnny. I would, and of course, Julie's going to know a lot about this. We've done a lot of work in Kentucky to remove barriers for students with disabilities in higher education, and specifically students with intellectual disabilities. There is a program called the Comprehensive Transition and Post-Secondary Programs that are authorized in the Federal Higher Education Act. And we have 5 U.S. Department of Education approved comprehensive transition and post-secondary programs for students with intellectual disabilities in Kentucky. But those students who are enrolled in those approved programs get their KEYS money. And they also can now, because of Senate Bill 94 from the 2022 regular session, they can apply for the Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship. Not the dual credit scholarship, the other one, the Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship. So I would encourage folks to, if you're not already, to become increasingly more aware of barriers that we've removed through policy in Kentucky and even through legislative action. And also Employment First is now law in Kentucky. And that is the notion that everyone can work and should have the opportunity to work in the community. And that competitive integrated employment is the first and preferred option for individuals with disabilities of working age who desire to become employed.
Awesome. Thank you, Johnny. How about you, David?
I'm probably gonna call back to the profile of transition practices that I mentioned earlier, and the main reason that I want to emphasize or try to amplify that tool is because the audience for that is essentially every participant in the student's IEP process. That's the student beginning at a minimum when they're 16 years old. The family, of course, is a consistent presence in those meetings. It's also an opportunity for vocational rehabilitation, for other agencies to be involved in individual planning that is specifically tailored toward that student's post-secondary goals and making plans that will help those be achieved. And so I think that's going to be my advocacy for that profile tool, is because it's tailored to provide some information usable by each member of that IEP team.
All right, thanks. I'm hearing you all say that there's a lot of support out there, and that one of our challenges is just communication, just making sure people know what is available as they work through these strategic plans and advocate for students at the local level. All right, one last question for our panelists, and then I'm going to turn things over to Trinity. I would like to just hear from each of you about just a little bit of heart response about why this work is so important to you, or why it's so important to Kentucky and the students that you serve. So just some last words from each of you.
Well, I can start. When I went into education several years ago, I was a single mom with 3 girls. I'm now a blended family with 9 children. And one of my own biological children was diagnosed 11 years ago with Devick's disease, which is a very rare autoimmune illness. And so for me, this is just, it's not just a career. It's my friends, it's my relatives, it's my neighbors, it's my family that lives in this area. And so it's my goal to give all of those students with disabilities that live in this area equal opportunity, because I'd like to see every single one of them that graduate high school and come to my college walk across that stage with a credential, including my own child. Right now, she is a senior at University of Kentucky, and she made the dean's list. Years ago, would that have been an option for her with Devick's disease, a child who's functionally blind with hydrocephalus, who's deaf in one ear, who is in a wheelchair and is a high functioning autistic child? Probably not. But now she's looking at law schools. So it's my hope that everybody has that opportunity.
Thank you, Julie.
This is Johnny. I would say, even with the best of intentions, one of the things that sometimes happen is we still tend to sort of talk around and about individuals with disabilities. So I really appreciate so much that example, Julie, and that lived experience. From my perspective, everybody on this call, all of our agencies, entities, organizations, and many others across the state, including our state as a whole, we all have a stake in the success of students with disabilities. But here's the reality: nobody has more of a stake in their success than they do.
No.
And that drives me. I hope in whatever way it makes sense to you, it drives all of us. But none of us, and most importantly, the students we serve, none of us have time to waste time on things that don't work. And when you mentioned tools a few minutes ago, sometimes we need a new tool. Sometimes the last thing we need is a new tool. I go out in my toolbox right now and I've got 27 Phillips screwdrivers. I just need to use a couple of them, right? So let's use them. Let's quit admiring the problems and let's together find the solutions that'll make a difference in people's lives.
No. Thank you, Johnny.
I think my answer would be expectations. I have been fortunate in my adult life to be in several different high-performing work environments and some fairly high-performing academic environments from different perspectives. And the common theme in each of those has been expectations for each person in every role that has control over some function in that particular organization. There are different types of roles that people occupy, different types of roles that people perform. The highest performing workplaces, the one consistent thing that I've always experienced is high expectations for the performance of every job in that facility, every job in that classroom, every job in that building. So what that suggests to me is there are opportunities, whatever someone's innate skill level may be, there's always an opportunity for excellence in that. And part of our responsibility as adults, as folks in the roles that we occupy, is not to lower those expectations just because of unique circumstances that an individual may be in. It's essentially, how can I make this person fit into the highest environment, the highest performing environment that they could possibly walk into, and still make that work for everybody. So that's my answer.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank all of you again for joining us today. So much love coming through the webinar. I can see it floating up about your comments. So inspirational and aspirational. Appreciate so much your heart for students with disabilities and for the importance of this work, not just for our Commonwealth and our economy, but for the people who are all important players in this ecosystem. So thank you all again for being here. We're really past time, so I'm gonna rush on now to Trinity, turn it over to her to talk about some data points related to this whole conversation. So thank you again to our panelists. We're going to turn things over to Trinity now.
Hello and welcome back to our data moment. And I want to start with a couple things. So one of the things that I think is the most important when considering our EPSOs and our learners with different abilities is, what story do our numbers tell us? And are they telling us the story we want to tell? It's important to not only look up and analyze your numbers, but make sure you understand what they're telling you. So I'm just going to give you a quick example. We're going to use the Kentucky State Report Card data from 21-22. And we're going to look at the population of all students in grades 9 through 12, and then the subgroups of students with IEPs and those who are English learners. And as you can see, we have a large population of these students in our state. Now, let's break that down to our students who are in our EPSO programs. If you go into your Kentucky State Report Card, you can click on Advanced Coursework, and then you can see where you land. Right now, we're looking at the whole state, but you can look at your own district or school. And once you've done this, you can see the numbers for advanced courses in total, which are AP, IB, Cambridge International, and dual credit students, but you can also just break it down to dual credit. And you can see percentages there, but those are the percentages of that population, not a comparison to the whole population of students. So I've kind of shown you that here on the screen of what that math really looks like. When you do the math and break it down to find the percentage compared to the entire student population, not just compared to the demographic population, you can see that the students with IEPs and who are English learners have quite a small number of students who are enrolled in these EPSO programs. And from there, I would encourage you to start digging into the root causes of this. And Johnny talked about this in his discussion at the very beginning about these root causes and what's leading us to having these small numbers. Do these numbers accurately reflect your student population? What can you do so that the EPSOs afforded to your students match your whole school demographic? I would strongly encourage you to brainstorm with all the folks who might have a stake in this, including teachers who work with these students, parents, and even these students. Can you come up with a creative way to make programs more accessible and students more successful? Like Johnny said, if we want different results, then we need to change the systems. For example, recently I was talking to a school district in Kentucky who hypothesized that one of the reasons that their large Spanish-speaking population wasn't taking classes like AP Spanish when they were clearly qualified was a language barrier. They started planning meetings for those students and their parents with Spanish language speakers so that they could understand the programming and the processes more easily. I would encourage you to create some online and paper resources for this population of students, something that they can easily access and then they can even take home to families. I've given you an example of the KCTCS Student Accessibility Resource Guide because I think that is a really easy one to look at, but make this work for you. Let's make sure we're servicing these students to meet their goals and their needs. Robin, I'm going to send it back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Trinity, for sharing a quick data moment with us and giving us something to think about. I think all of our panelists today emphasize the need to really dig in and know where we are in service to our students with disabilities, and then to think deeply and intentionally about how to support them. So I want to say thank you again to Johnny and David and Julie for joining us today, for sharing their experience and their great ideas. As always, thank you again to Trinity for challenging us to know and act upon our data. We also thank you for joining us today and hope that you're inspired, as we are, to make the most of this moment in time for our students with disabilities. Before we go, I want to give you a quick reminder. Be sure that you are registered for the entire webinar series we have planned for 23-24. We're super excited to launch today with this important topic. Next up is Tuesday, October 3rd, when we'll be talking about advising students well and avoiding those pitfalls of random acts of dual credit. We want to ensure that all of the early post-secondary opportunities that students take advantage of will be helpful to them and will be applicable to their pathways and future success. We'll be welcoming Kristen Hornsby from Northern Kentucky University, Aaron Baker from Eastern Kentucky University, and our very own Beth Collins here from CPE, who has extensive experience in K-12 and post-secondary institutions, working directly with students, and who now works with transferability here at CPE. So again, we thank you for joining, and until next time, we will see you soon.